Ambassador ZYX Thala of the Etherian Confederation still remembered the day the transmission arrived. It had been 3 cycles ago, during the routine morning briefing when Junior Communications Officer Vexnari burst into the council chamber, his bioluminescent patches flickering with excitement. "Ambassador," he had gasped, his breathing slits working overtime, "we're receiving distress calls from the Sol system. The primitives are... they're begging for help." The council chamber had fallen silent. Sol 3, or Earth as its inhabitants called it, was barely a footnote in galactic civilization. Their most advanced technology consisted of crude chemical rockets and primitive nuclear reactors. They hadn't even achieved sustainable fusion, let alone faster-than-light travel. Most species didn't bother monitoring their radio chatter anymore. But Vexnari played the transmission anyway. The voice that filled the chamber was human, young, female, trembling with barely controlled desperation. She spoke in what their translators identified as English, though the raw emotion in her words transcended language barriers. "This is Dr. Elizabeth Morgan of the Earth Defense Coalition. To any civilization listening, we need help. A kilometer-wide asteroid is on a collision course with our planet. Impact in 72 hours. We've tried everything: nuclear missiles, gravity tractors, every solution our science can provide. Nothing works." The transmission crackled with static, but the voice continued, stronger now. "We're not asking for charity. We know we have nothing to offer advanced civilizations. But we have children here. 8 billion souls who've never done anything but dream of touching the stars someday. If there's anyone out there, anyone at all, please, help us live long enough to earn our place among you." Council member Drexvala had been the first to break the silence. Primitives. They should have seen this coming decades ago. Natural selection in action. Others had murmured agreement. Asteroid deflection was expensive, requiring specialized equipment and fuel. The humans were decades away from spaceflight, centuries from galactic relevance. Why waste resources on a species that might never contribute anything meaningful? But something in that transmission had reached ZYX Thala. Perhaps it was the way the human had spoken of children first, civilization second. Perhaps it was the dignity in her voice as she acknowledged their primitive status while still daring to hope. Or perhaps it was simply the mathematical beauty of their gravitational calculations, crude but elegant, included in the transmission's data packet. "I'm authorizing the deployment of Mining Vessel 7 Alpha," she had announced, her decision surprising even herself. The council erupted. "Ambassador, the expense? Completely unjustified. They'll never repay. It's a single automated vessel." ZYX Thala cut them off. "Routine asteroid deflection. We perform such operations monthly for member species." What she didn't mention was that those operations were performed for civilizations that could repay the favor, species with established trade routes and valuable resources. The humans had nothing to offer but gratitude. Mining Vessel 7 Alpha had completed its mission in 47 minutes. A simple gravity pulse precisely calculated, nudging the asteroid into a harmless solar orbit. For Etherian technology, it was as routine as breathing. The human response had been overwhelming. For months afterward, Earth's radio transmissions flooded Etherian monitoring stations. Mathematical theorems, musical compositions, artistic masterpieces, historical records, scientific data, everything they could think to share. And always the same message repeated in hundreds of languages. Humanity owes the Etherian Confederation a debt beyond measure. We will not forget. ZYX Thala had filed the incident in the minor colonial assistance category and moved on. The humans would develop naturally, perhaps achieve spaceflight in a century or two, maybe even qualify for Junior Confederation status eventually. She had no way of knowing that humans approached debt very, very differently than the rest of the galaxy. She had no way of knowing that "we will not forget" wasn't just gratitude. It was a promise. 57 Earth years had passed. A mere blink by Etherian standards, but enough time for ZYX Thala to retire to the crystal gardens of Proxima Luxuria. She had been tending her thought orchids, those delicate flowers that bloomed only in response to peaceful meditation, when her personal communicator erupted with an emergency priority signal. The device hadn't made that particular sound in decades. Priority signals were reserved for galactic emergencies, supernovas threatening inhabited systems, quantum anomalies disrupting hyperspace lanes, or declarations of war between major civilizations. HFY's aged hands trembled slightly as she activated the receiver, expecting news of some cosmic catastrophe. What she got instead was impossible. The transmission came through official Confederation channels, complete with proper encryption protocols and authenticated security codes that would have taken a Level 6 civilization decades to crack. The voice that emerged from her communicator spoke in flawless High Etherian, not the simplified trade dialect most species learned, but the complex ceremonial language used only in formal diplomatic exchanges. Honored Ambassador HFY of the Etherian Confederation. The voice began, carrying subtle tonal harmonics that indicated deep respect and careful pronunciation. This is Admiral Marcus Rodriguez of the United Earth Naval Command. I believe you once did our species a considerable favor. HFY's three hearts stopped in perfect synchronization. Earth, the primitive world she'd helped decades ago. But the sophistication of this transmission was staggering. Not just the language skills, but the technical achievement it represented. Humans shouldn't have developed faster-than-light communication for centuries, if ever. Her breathing slits fluttered with anxiety as the message continued. We understand the Jaxian Empire has formally declared war on the Confederation, Rodriguez said, his pronunciation of Jaxian perfect despite the species' linguistic complexity. Our intelligence suggests they have successfully conquered 17 star systems in the past standard cycle, including 3 Etherian colonial worlds: New Harmony, Crystal Shore, and Deep Current. Each word hit HFY like a plasma bolt. This information was classified at the highest levels of Confederation security. The Jaxian War was barely 3 months old, and details about the conquered colonies were known only to the Inner Council. Even retired ambassadors weren't supposed to have access to such intelligence. Our analysis indicates their current trajectory will bring them to the core Etherian worlds within 2 standard cycles. The human continued. The Confederation Council's defensive preparations suggest they expect to lose approximately 40% of their remaining territory before achieving a military stalemate. HFY sank into her meditation chair, her elderly exoskeleton creaking with the sudden movement. The humans' casualty estimates matched the Council's most pessimistic projections that existed only in the minds of the highest-ranking military strategists. Admiral, she whispered to the empty garden, how do you know this? As if hearing her question, the transmission continued. Ambassador HFY, humanity has not forgotten the debt we owe your people. We would very much like to repay it. When you are prepared to discuss terms, please respond to the coordinates attached to this message. We will be waiting. The coordinates materialized in her communicator's display, a system designation she didn't recognize, located 3 sectors spin-ward of Earth. According to her personal database, that system contained nothing but a red dwarf star and some unremarkable rocky planets. Confederation surveys had marked it as uninhabitable, no strategic value nearly 2 centuries ago. As the transmission ended, HFY noticed her thought orchids had closed their petals. The delicate flowers, which bloomed only in the presence of tranquil minds, had sensed her growing unease. Something had changed in the galaxy. Something involving the species she'd saved with a single mining vessel and a moment's compassion. She had the distinct feeling that the universe was about to become a very different place. HFY's personal cruiser Serene Contemplation dropped out of hyperspace at the provided coordinates with a violent shudder that sent warning signals cascading across every console. Her ship's AI, a sophisticated Etherian construct that had navigated the galaxy's most treacherous space lanes, immediately began screaming proximity alerts in 5 different languages. Impossible, she breathed, her compound eyes straining to process what lay before her. The system that Confederation surveys had dismissed as uninhabitable wasteland now housed what could only be described as an industrial miracle. 7 massive orbital installations hung in perfect geometric formation around the system's red dwarf star, each structure easily dwarfing the largest Etherian city ships. They weren't built. They appeared to have been grown, their surfaces flowing with organic curves that hurt to look at directly, as if her brain couldn't quite accept their dimensional properties. Between the installations, hundreds of vessels moved in carefully choreographed patterns. These weren't the blocky, utilitarian designs favored by most spacefaring civilizations. Instead, they were sleek predatory shapes that seemed to slice through space itself, leaving ripples in reality that her ship's sensors couldn't properly measure. Some appeared to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, their quantum signatures flickering between states that violated everything she understood about physics. "By the eternal depths," Zuextala whispered, invoking an oath she hadn't used since her youth. "What have they built?" Her ship's communication array crackled to life without any input from her, an impossibility that should have triggered every security protocol in her vessel's databanks. Etherian vessel serene contemplation, came a warm, distinctly human voice. "This is Admiral Rodriguez. Permission to come aboard? I promise we're friendlier than our architecture suggests." Before Zyxthala could formulate a response, her tactical displays registered a small craft detaching from the nearest installation. The vessel moved without any visible propulsion system, gliding through space as if the vacuum itself was cooperating with its passage. Her sensors detected no engine signatures, no gravitational disturbances, no energy emissions of any kind. The craft simply moved as naturally as a fish through water. As it approached her ship, Zyxthala noticed something that made her respiratory slits flutter with anxiety. The craft wasn't approaching through normal space. It was approaching through folded space, taking shortcuts through dimensions that her instruments insisted didn't exist. "How?" she asked aloud, though no one was there to answer. The docking process was equally disturbing. The human craft didn't connect to her ship's airlock. It simply merged with her hull, creating a temporary bridge of matter that shouldn't have been possible. Her ship's AI, usually chatty to the point of annoyance, had fallen completely silent, as if it had decided that discretion was the better part of existence. Minutes later, she found herself face to face with a human for the first time in her life. Admiral Rodriguez was smaller than she'd expected from the impressive transmissions, standing barely 2 meters tall. His skin was weathered and dark, marked with the kind of small scars that spoke of a life spent in dangerous places. His uniform was simple, almost primitive by galactic standards, no energy weaves or quantum fibers, just basic synthetic fabric in dark blue and gold. But his eyes contained depths that reminded her of the spaces between galaxies. When he looked at her, she had the unsettling sensation that he was seeing not just her physical form, but her quantum signature, her dimensional resonance, perhaps even her timeline probability matrix. "Thank you for coming, Ambassador," Rodriguez said, his bio-translator rendering his words in perfect ceremonial Etherian. "We weren't entirely certain our message would reach you, given the fluid nature of galactic communications lately." Zyxthala found her voice with some difficulty. "Admiral, how is any of this possible? Your species was barely capable of orbital flight when we last made contact." Rodriguez smiled, a uniquely human expression that somehow conveyed warmth, determination, and just a hint of something that might have been pity for the rest of the universe. "Ambassador," he said gently, "you saved our entire species from extinction. Did you really think we'd spend the next 57 years sitting idle?" The observation lounge where Rodriguez led her defied every principle of engineering Zyxthala had learned in 3 centuries of life. The walls appeared to be constructed from crystallized vacuum itself, offering an unobstructed 360-degree view of the impossible structures outside. She could see through the floor beneath her feet to watch construction crews adding new sections to the stellar ring, their work suits allowing them to manipulate matter at the molecular level with casual ease. "Please sit," Rodriguez said, gesturing toward chairs that materialized from the floor as he spoke. The furniture adjusted itself to her physiology perfectly, somehow understanding Etherian anatomy better than most medical scanners. "I know this must be overwhelming," he continued, settling into his own chair with the easy confidence of someone who had grown accustomed to miracles. "The first thing you need to understand about humans is that we have a fundamental philosophical problem with the word impossible. A holographic display manifested between them without any visible projector, showing Earth as it had been 57 years ago. A blue-green marble orbiting a modest yellow star, its inhabitants barely capable of reaching their own moon. "When you saved us," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute sincerity, "you didn't just deflect an asteroid. You proved something that changed our entire species forever. You proved that the universe contained civilizations capable of manipulating matter and energy in ways our physics insisted were impossible." The display shifted, showing the devastating asteroid that would have ended human civilization, then the elegant intervention of the Etherian mining vessel. Xyxthala watched her own people's technology casually violate humanity's understanding of physics with a simple gravity pulse. "So we did what humans do when faced with the impossible," Rodriguez continued. "We decided the problem wasn't with the universe. It was with our understanding of it." The hologram transformed into a three-dimensional timeline showing humanity's development over the past 57 years. What Xyxthala saw made her respiratory slits seal involuntarily. "You're thinking linearly," Rodriguez observed, noticing her distress. "You assume technological development follows predictable paths. Metallurgy leads to better ships. Energy research leads to better power sources. Weapons research leads to better weapons. But humans don't think linearly." The timeline exploded into a complex web showing thousands of parallel research paths. Where other species would have spent decades perfecting conventional rockets, humans had immediately begun work on probability manipulation. Instead of developing better materials, they had learned to convince matter to behave differently. Rather than harnessing new energy sources, they had started borrowing power from adjacent dimensions. "We couldn't match your metallurgy," Rodriguez explained as the display showed human scientists abandoning traditional manufacturing in favor of reality editing. "So we learned to fold space-time until distance became negotiable. We couldn't replicate your fusion reactors, so we learned to tap into the zero-point energy fluctuations that exist between moments. We couldn't build shields like yours, so we developed technology that exists in superposition, simultaneously destroyed and undamaged until someone tries to attack it." Each breakthrough was accompanied by schematics that made Xyxthala's mathematical processing centers ache. Human technology didn't follow rules, it rewrote them. Their ships didn't overcome physical limitations, they convinced physics to grant exceptions. "Your people build with the universe," Rodriguez said, his smile carrying that uniquely human mixture of warmth and barely contained audacity. "Humans build despite it." The display showed the stellar ring outside, its impossible architecture growing in real time as construction crews added sections that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. "That ring," Xyxthala managed, her voice barely a whisper. "What does it do?" Rodriguez's smile widened. "It's a manufacturing facility. We're building a fleet." "How many ships?" "Well," Rodriguez said, leaning back in his chair as if discussing the weather, "that depends entirely on how many you think the galaxy needs. You see, Ambassador, the beautiful thing about convincing the universe to cooperate is that traditional concepts like resource limitations become more like suggestions." Outside the observation lounge, Xyxthala watched a new destroyer materialize from pure probability, its hull condensing from quantum foam as human engineers applied mathematics that shouldn't have worked. "The Confederation builds technology," Rodriguez concluded, his words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Humans build impossibilities. And right now, we owe you one very large impossibility." Rodriguez waved his hand, and the holographic display transformed into a three-dimensional map of the galaxy that made Xyxthala's hearts race with terror. Red markers spread across 17 star systems like a malignant infection, each one representing a Jaxian conquest. The precision of the intelligence was staggering. Not just system names, but detailed fleet compositions, troop deployments, even the names of Jaxian commanders who were supposed to be classified beyond the highest security clearances. "The Jaxian Empire," Rodriguez said, his tone shifting from casual to businesslike, "has conquered 17 systems in the past 4 standard months. Their current military force consists of approximately 12,000 heavy cruisers, 47,000 support vessels, 3 million ground troops, and, according to our latest reconnaissance, 14 planet crackers held in reserve. HFY Stala's respiratory slits fluttered in panic. Planet crackers were theoretical weapons that most civilizations considered too horrific to actually build. The fact that the Jaxians possessed them had been the Confederation's most closely guarded secret. "How do you know about the planet crackers?" she whispered. Rodriguez's smile was gentle but unsettling. "Ambassador, when you learn to fold space-time, traditional concepts like classified information become somewhat fluid. We've been monitoring Jaxian communications since about 6 hours after they declared war." The display zoomed in on the Jaxian Empire's heartworlds, showing fleet movements and supply lines with nauseating accuracy. Each piece of data represented intelligence that should have been impossible for any outside force to obtain. "Our projections indicate they'll reach your core worlds within 2 standard cycles," Rodriguez continued. "The Confederation Council's current strategy appears to be a fighting retreat to the Meridian Defense Line, where they hope to achieve a stalemate at the cost of approximately 60% of Etherian territory." HFY Stala felt her exoskeleton creaking under the weight of despair. "Yes, the evacuation fleets are already being prepared. 12 billion Etherians will lose their homeworlds. The Council believes it's our only option for species survival." Evacuation. Rodriguez repeated the word as if it left a bad taste in his mouth. He stood and walked to the crystalline wall, gazing out at the impossible human fleet maneuvering through folded space. "Ambassador, with the deepest respect for Etherian strategic thinking, humans don't evacuate. We escalate." The galactic map shifted again, now showing something that made HFY Stala's mathematical centers overflow with incomprehension. The human fleet wasn't measured in thousands like every other spacefaring civilization. The numbers climbing on the display moved through millions, then tens of millions, then stopped counting and simply displayed infinity. "That can't be real," HFY Stala breathed. "Reality is negotiable when you build your industrial base in 11 dimensions simultaneously," Rodriguez replied matter-of-factly. "Every ship we construct exists in multiple probability states until we need it. Schrödinger's navy, you might say." He returned to his chair, his expression growing serious. "Ambassador, humanity is formally offering our assistance in this conflict. Not as mercenaries, not for territorial gain, not for resources or technology transfers. We're offering to help because 57 years ago, you saved our children's future." The display now showed detailed schematics of human warships that appeared to be designed by beings who had given up on physics entirely. Weapons that fired concentrated entropy. Shields that existed in tomorrow's timeline. Engines that moved by convincing the universe they were already at their destination. "The Jaxians are a level 7 civilization," HFY Stala protested weakly. "They have weapons that can crack planets. Their shields can withstand direct stellar bombardment. Their warriors have conquered species that ruled the galaxy for millennia." Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, we've reviewed their capabilities extensively. By traditional military standards, they're quite impressive." "Traditional standards?" "Ambassador," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying that uniquely human combination of politeness and absolute confidence. "You're describing the kind of enemy we call a good warm-up exercise." Outside the observation lounge, a massive construction facility materialized from quantum foam, its assembly lines already producing ships that existed in states of controlled impossibility. "How many ships do you need?" Rodriguez asked, as casually as if he were offering her tea. HFY Stala stared at the endless streams of vessels emerging from probability itself. "Admiral, how many ships do you have?" Rodriguez's smile could have powered a small star. "How many do you need?" 3 days later, Admiral Thex Moore of the Jaxian 7th Fleet arrived at the Kepler 442 system with the absolute confidence that came from conquering 17 civilizations without a single tactical defeat. His battle-scarred dreadnought Inevitable Conquest led a formation of 800 vessels that had reduced entire star systems to glowing debris fields. The Jaxians had perfected warfare over 3 millennia of galactic dominance. Their ships were mobile fortresses designed to withstand anything the universe could throw at them. Their warriors were bred for aggression and enhanced with cybernetic implants that made them living weapons. Their tactics had been refined through countless campaigns against species that had ruled the stars for eons. Thexmore had personally overseen the subjugation of the crystalline Vexani, whose diamond hulls could withstand stellar radiation. He had shattered the legendary fortress worlds of the Kethmiron Republic, breaking sieges that had lasted centuries. He had watched the proud Zephyrian Empire kneel before Jaxian might, their quantum shields useless against planet-cracking ordnance. But as his fleet dropped out of hyperspace expecting to find the usual terrified resistance, Admiral Thexmore encountered something entirely outside his considerable experience. Humans. The first indication that something was wrong came from his sensor officer, a veteran of 43 campaigns whose voice carried an uncharacteristic tremor. "Admiral, I'm not sure how to describe this, sir. The enemy fleet appears to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously." Thexmore's primary eyes focused on the tactical display, trying to process what his instruments were showing him. Individual human vessels seemed to flicker in and out of existence like quantum ghosts, appearing randomly throughout his carefully arranged battle formations before vanishing again. His targeting computers couldn't achieve lock-on because the ships refused to maintain consistent positions in normal spacetime. "Status report," he barked, his scarred mandibles clicking with frustration. "Sir, we've lost contact with battle groups 7, 11, and 15. His communications officer replied, her usual efficiency replaced by barely controlled panic. "Sensors indicate they're not there anymore, sir." "What do you mean, not there?" Thexmore demanded, watching his tactical display as entire sections of his fleet simply weren't. Not destroyed, not retreating, they had simply ceased to be present in this reality. "I mean, they appear to have been retroactively prevented from existing, sir. As if they were never deployed to this system in the first place." Thexmore turned to watch a human vessel phase through his flagship's shields as if they were made of wishful thinking. The ship defied every principle of design he understood. Its hull seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously, covered with geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. When his weapons attempted to target it, the projectiles simply forgot what they were supposed to hit. His personal communicator crackled with an incoming transmission, the voice speaking in perfect Hijaxian, a language that was supposed to be impossible for alien vocal cords to pronounce. "Admiral Thexmore," came the calm, almost conversational tone. "This is Admiral Rodriguez of the United Earth Naval Command. We're here regarding a debt to our friends in the Etherian Confederation." The human's pronunciation was flawless, carrying the proper honorific inflections that indicated deep respect for Jaxian military tradition. But there was something else in the voice. A casual confidence that suggested this entire fleet action was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "We understand you've been having some territorial disputes," Rodriguez continued as Thexmore watched his remaining ships begin to forget how to fire their weapons. "We'd like to help you reconsider your expansion policies." Around him, the bridge crew of the inevitable conquest stared at their instruments in growing bewilderment as reality itself seemed to be filing a complaint against Jaxian military doctrine. The war lasted exactly 18 minutes and 37 seconds, though time itself seemed somewhat negotiable during the engagement. In those 18 minutes, the Jaxian Empire, a civilization that had terrorized a quarter of the galaxy for 3,000 years, simply decided it had never been interested in military expansion in the first place. Their fleets didn't surrender. They discovered a sudden and overwhelming passion for scientific exploration. Their weapons didn't malfunction. They evolved into advanced archaeological scanning equipment. Their conquered worlds weren't liberated. The universe gently suggested that perhaps those invasions had been a shared misunderstanding. Ambassador HFY watched the entire engagement from the bridge of Rodriguez's flagship, her compound eyes struggling to process events that violated causality itself. Through the crystalline viewports, she witnessed Jaxian dreadnoughts peacefully requesting permission to conduct xenoarchaeological surveys of uninhabited systems. Planet Cracker weapons spontaneously developed an ethical subroutine that made them unsuitable for anything except mining asteroids for rare minerals. "How?" she whispered as Admiral Thexmore's personal communication began broadcasting an eloquent apology for the regrettable misunderstanding that had led to recent hostilities. Humans excel at creative problem-solving, Rodriguez replied calmly, monitoring reports that described reality being carefully edited in real time. The Jaxians were a problem. Now they're an enthusiastic archaeological expedition with a passion for peaceful exploration and a deep respect for galactic sovereignty. On the main display, the Jaxian 7th Fleet was already reorganizing itself into research formations, their sensors now calibrated for stellar cartography rather than target acquisition. Several Jaxian captains had begun transmitting dissertations on the cultural significance of ancient ruins they discovered in previously conquered systems. But their empire, HFY protested weakly. The 17 systems they conquered, the colonies they destroyed, are exactly as they were before the Jaxians arrived, Rodriguez said with characteristic human understatement. Just with some very confused historians who'll need to update their textbooks. We've convinced the universe that the Jaxian expansion was actually a 3,000-year-long archaeological survey that got slightly out of hand. HFY watched in stunned silence as refugee fleets that had fled Jaxian conquest zones received messages informing them that their homeworlds had never been in danger. Entire populations who had mourned destroyed civilizations were discovering that their cultures had been continuously flourishing under the protection of what they now remembered as the Jaxian Archaeological Preservation Society. You didn't just defeat them, she breathed. You retroactively prevented their entire military expansion. Military expansion seemed inefficient, Rodriguez acknowledged. Much easier to convince history that they were always peaceful researchers with an unfortunate tendency toward aggressive-sounding ship names. 6 hours after the engagement ended, representatives from across the galaxy were requesting emergency sessions with human diplomats. The Confederation Council had called 3 separate emergency sessions to draft legislation granting humanity not just immediate membership, but a permanent seat on the governing body. Several previously unknown civilizations had emerged from deep space to formally thank humanity for solving problems they hadn't dared to report. The Jaxian Emperor himself had transmitted a formal statement declaring the Empire's new dedication to peaceful exploration and the preservation of galactic cultural heritage, apparently unaware that his empire had ever possessed a military force. As HFY prepared to depart the human system, her personal communicator received one final message from Admiral Rodriguez. Ambassador, humanity considers its debt to the Etherian Confederation fully repaid. However, if you ever need assistance with any other challenges, please don't hesitate to contact us. We've discovered we're quite good at convincing the universe to be more reasonable. Later, in her personal logs, HFY would write, recommendation to all future diplomatic personnel. When dealing with humans, exercise extreme caution regarding favors. Their concept of proportional response appears to include rewriting fundamental aspects of reality. Handle with care. The galaxy, for its part, quickly learned a new rule. When humanity owes you a favor, expect not just repayment, but comprehensive universal improvements that solve problems you didn't even know existed. And somewhere in the depths of space, human engineers were already sketching plans for their next impossible project. Something about helping a small civilization terraform dead systems, because apparently someone had made an offhand comment about needing more livable worlds. After all, humanity still owed the universe a favor or two.